The silence of the southern pole is not merely an absence of sound. It is a weight, an ancient and absolute pressure that seems to swallow the very concept of time. Here, at the bottom of the world, the air is so thin and the cold so predatory that the land itself feels like a foreign body, a visitor from a different geological epoch that forgot to leave. For thousands of miles, there is only the white, a vast, undulating desert of frozen water that hides a continent larger than Europe. To look upon it is to look upon a blank page, a place where geography has been redacted by the relentless hand of the ice. But as we stand on the edge of this frozen frontier, a haunting question begins to stir in the sub-zero winds. What if this void is not empty? What if the ice is not a beginning, but a shroud pulled tight over the remains of the very first civilization the Earth ever knew? For most of human history, Antarctica was a myth, a mathematical necessity imagined by Greek philosophers who believed the world required a southern counterweight to remain balanced. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. It was a phantom on the maps of the Renaissance, a canvas for sea monsters and imagined mountain ranges. But as the centuries turned and the first wooden hulls crunched against the pack ice, the myth gave way to a reality far more terrifying. This was not a land of monsters, but a land of absolute stillness. Yet, beneath that stillness, the Earth remembers a different version of itself. Geological core samples, pulled from the deep crust like needles from a haystack, tell a story of a world that once breathed. They reveal a time when Antarctica was not a tomb, but a garden, a place of temperate rainforests, meandering rivers, and a sun that did not just reflect off the snow but actually warmed the soil. This transition from a lush, green cradle to a frozen wasteland is one of the most violent transformations in our planet's biography. It is a story of deep time, where continents drift like slow-motion ships and climates pivot on the head of a pin. If humans, or a precursor to humanity, ever walked those green valleys, their entire world was erased not by a sudden flood or a falling star, but by the slow, crushing advance of the glaciers. The ice moved in like a slow-motion sandpaper, grinding mountains into dust and smoothing over the valleys where cities might have stood. It is the ultimate eraser. Today, we are left to sift through the anomalies, the maps that shouldn't exist, and the shapes beneath the ice that defy the logic of wind and erosion. We are looking for the ghost of a civilization that may have been old when the pyramids of Giza were still just a dream in the mind of a pharaoh. To understand the stakes of this mystery, one must first understand the power of geological erasure. We often think of history as something written in stone, a permanent record left for the future. But the Earth is a restless author, constantly tearing out pages and rewriting over its past. In the temperate zones, history is buried under soil and forest. In the oceans, it is dissolved by salt and pressure. But in Antarctica, history is locked in a white sarcophagus. The ice sheet is not a static object. It is a slow, heavy river of frozen water, miles deep, pressing down with a force that can flatten entire mountain ranges. It flows from the center of the continent outward to the sea, carrying with it whatever it has picked up along the way. If there were temples here, if there were roads, they have been ground into a fine silt, scattered across the seafloor or buried so deep that they may as well be on another planet. This is the challenge of the search. We are looking for the impossible, a needle that has been crushed and scattered across an area of 14 million square kilometers. Yet, the Earth is not perfect in its destruction. It leaves fragments. It leaves whispers. The ice moves slowly, and in its slow-motion crawl, it sometimes preserves what it should have destroyed. We find fossilized ferns that look as though they were picked yesterday. We find the bones of creatures that haven't walked the Earth in 50 million years. And occasionally, we find things that do not fit the timeline. Things that suggest that the history of human intelligence may be far older and far more tragic than we have ever dared to imagine. This is not just a search for ruins. It is a search for our own forgotten identity. If we are not the first to rise to the heights of civilization, then the story of our species is not a straight line of progress, but a cycle of rise and fall, buried in the dark, cold depths of the forgotten earth. The first thread in this tapestry of paradox begins not in the ice, but on a piece of gazelle skin parchment discovered in the archives of the Topkapi Palace in 1929. This is the Piri Reis map, compiled in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who claimed to have used source maps dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. At first glance, it is a masterpiece of Renaissance cartography, showing the coasts of Africa and South America with startling detail. But it is the bottom of the map that causes the breath to catch. There, stretching away from the tip of South America, is a coastline that many researchers believe is the Queen Maud Land of Antarctica. What makes this impossible is not just the date of the map, centuries before Antarctica's official discovery, but the condition of the land it depicts. The coastline on the Piri Reis map appears to show Antarctica without its ice. This is a cartographic impossibility that challenges the very foundation of our geological timeline. Modern science tells us that the Antarctic ice sheet has been in place for millions of years. To map the coastline of the continent without its frozen veil, someone would have had to be sailing those southern waters in a time so distant that it predates the rise of any known human culture. The paradox is clear. How could a 16th century admiral possess a map that accurately reflects the subglacial topography of a continent that was not supposed to be visible for at least 6,000 years, if not millions? The lines on the parchment are confident, tracing the contours of bays and rivers that are today buried under 2 miles of solid ice. It suggests a level of geographical knowledge that should not have existed, a ghost of a maritime tradition that spanned the globe before the first written word was ever etched into clay. Skepticism, of course, is the natural response to such an extraordinary claim. Conventional historians argue that the lower portion of the Piri Reis map is not Antarctica at all, but a distorted rendering of the South American coastline, curved to fit the dimensions of the parchment. They suggest that the Ottoman admiral, lacking information on the southern reaches of the Atlantic, simply filled in the space with a speculative landmass, a common practice among cartographers of the era who were obsessed with the idea of a southern continent. They point out that the map is full of other errors, islands that don't exist, coastlines that are stretched and warped, and that to pick out one section and call it a perfect representation of a subglacial Antarctica is a classic example of confirmation bias. To the skeptic, the Piri Reis map is a beautiful artifact of its time, but it is not a window into a forgotten prehistory. However, the rebuttal to this skepticism lies in the precision of the anomalies. When the Piri Reis map was compared to the seismic soundings taken during the International Geophysical Year in 1958, the results were unsettling. The coastline shown on the 1513 map corresponds with surprising accuracy to the subglacial bedrock of Queen Maud Land. This is not a vague shape that one can squint at and imagine into existence. It is a specific topographical match. If it were merely a speculative addition, why does it align so closely with the actual landmass hidden beneath the ice? Furthermore, the Piri Reis map is not the only one. Other charts, like the Orontius Phineas map of 1531 and the Bwatch map of 1737, also depict a southern continent with mountain ranges and rivers where today there is only white. The persistence of these details suggests that there was a common source, a master map or a tradition of mapping that had been passed down through the shadows of history, preserved by secret libraries or forgotten lineages of navigators who knew the world as it was before the Great Freeze. As we move deeper into the interior of the continent, the mystery shifts from maps on parchment to shapes in the stone. In the shadow of the Transantarctic Mountains, satellite imagery has revealed formations that defy the organic chaos of nature. These are the supposed pyramids of Antarctica, massive, four-sided peaks that rise from the ice with a symmetry that is startling to the human eye. To look at them is to feel a sense of recognition, a primal memory of the monuments of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. They stand in isolation, their faces scoured by the wind, their edges sharp and deliberate. In a land of shifting snow and jagged ridges, these geometric anomalies stand out as something deliberate, something engineered. They suggest a scale of construction that dwarfs the works of the pharaohs, a monumental architecture designed to withstand the crushing weight of geological time. The paradox of these shapes is one of scale and environment. If these are indeed man-made structures, the civilization that built them would have possessed a level of engineering and logistical capability that exceeds anything in the archaeological record. To build on such a scale in the most hostile climate on Earth would require a social organization and a mastery of materials that we are only just beginning to achieve in the modern era. And yet, there they are, or so it seems. If they are natural, why is their symmetry so perfect? Why do they appear to align with the cardinal directions, much like the Great Pyramid of Giza? The existence of such shapes in a place where no humans were supposed to be for tens of thousands of years creates a rift in our understanding of the past. It suggests that the first chapter of our story was not written in the Fertile Crescent, but in the heart of the frozen South. Skepticism again provides a grounded alternative. Geologists call these formations nunataks, the peaks of mountains that protrude through the surface of an ice sheet. The pyramidal shape, they argue, is a natural consequence of a process called freeze-thaw weathering. Water gets into the cracks of the rock, freezes, expands, and shatters the stone, eventually carving out flat faces and sharp edges. In a continent as large as Antarctica with millions of mountain peaks, it is statistically inevitable that a few would end up with a vaguely pyramidal shape. The human brain is hardwired for pareidolia, the tendency to see familiar patterns in random data. We see faces on Mars and pyramids in Antarctica because our minds crave order and meaning. To the geologist, these are not monuments. They are simply the result of wind and ice acting upon the bedrock over millions of years. Yet, the rebuttal to the geological explanation lies in the details that nature rarely provides. Freeze-thaw weathering is an indiscriminate force. It shatters and crumbles. It doesn't typically create smooth, perfectly flat faces on four sides of a mountain simultaneously. While a single pyramidal peak might be an accident of nature, the presence of multiple such formations, often in close proximity and sharing similar alignments, begins to strain the laws of probability. Furthermore, some of these mountains show signs of what researchers call anomalous engineering, layers of stone that appear to be stacked rather than formed through natural sedimentation. Until a team can stand on the slopes of these peaks and take physical samples, the debate remains locked in a stalemate. But the very existence of the question is a testament to the continent's power to haunt our scientific certainty. Antarctica does not just hide the past. It challenges the way we interpret the world around us. Beyond the silent peaks and the impossible geometry of the mountain ranges lies a world even more detached from our reality. Beneath the surface of the ice, there exists a hidden geography of water, a network of over 400 subglacial lakes that have been sealed away from the atmosphere for millions of years. The largest of these, Lake Vostok, is a body of water the size of Lake Ontario, buried under nearly 4 kilometers of solid, crushing ice. It is a place of total, absolute darkness, where the pressure is enough to liquefy bone and the water remains liquid only because of the immense weight of the ceiling above and the faint, pulsing warmth of the Earth's core below. To consider Lake Vostok is to consider a time capsule of the purest kind, a liquid laboratory that has not seen the sun since the first mammals began to crawl through the undergrowth of an ancient green Antarctica. When scientists first began to probe the depths of this subglacial sea, they expected to find a sterile, stagnant environment, a dead world locked in a cold grave. But the reality that emerged from the deep boreholes was far more unsettling. The water of Lake Vostok is supersaturated with oxygen, containing levels 50 times higher than those found in typical freshwater lakes on the surface. This chemical paradox suggests a world that is not dying, but breathing. The energy required to maintain such an environment, and the biological complexity it implies, hints at an ecosystem that has evolved in total isolation, far beyond the reach of the light. But it is not just the oxygen that haunts the researchers. It is the heat. In certain sectors of the lake, the temperature of the water rises significantly, suggesting a geothermal source that is not just a random vent, but a consistent, localized energy output. This leads us to a staggering paradox. In a world of absolute ice, why is there such a concentration of energy and life-sustaining chemistry in a single, isolated location? The data gathered from remote sensors and satellite gravimetry reveals something even more provocative: a massive magnetic anomaly located at the northern end of Lake Vostok. This is not a subtle shift in the Earth's field, but a sharp, localized distortion that covers an area of several thousand square kilometers. To the instruments of the modern world, it looks like a concentrated mass of metal or a highly structured electromagnetic field buried deep within the bedrock, beneath the water, beneath the ice. The paradox is unavoidable. Nature rarely produces such concentrated, geometric magnetic signatures. It is the kind of reading one might expect from a buried city, a massive industrial complex, or a technological relic that is still, after eons of burial, emitting a faint rhythmic pulse of energy. The skeptical perspective offers a more grounded interpretation of these findings. Geologists point to the fact that Antarctica is a continent of high volcanic activity, much of it hidden beneath the ice. The heat in Lake Vostok, they argue, is likely the result of a tectonic rift or a hydrothermal vent, similar to those found on the floor of the deep ocean. The high oxygen levels could be the result of the way the ice melts and refreezes at the lake's surface, trapping air bubbles and compressing them over millions of years until the water becomes a chemical sponge. As for the magnetic anomaly, the skeptics suggest it is a natural deposit of iron ore or a specific type of volcanic rock that possesses high magnetic susceptibility. To them, Lake Vostok is a fascinating geological curiosity, but it is not an archaeological site. It is a testament to the Earth's ability to create strange, isolated environments through the blind forces of chemistry and physics. But the rebuttal to this skepticism lies in the sheer specificity of the anomaly. Natural magnetic deposits, while common, tend to follow the messy, jagged lines of mineral veins and tectonic plates. The Vostok anomaly, however, possesses a degree of structural coherence that has led some researchers to suggest it is not a mineral deposit at all, but a deliberate construction. When we combine this with the biological samples retrieved from the ice just above the waterline, the mystery deepens. DNA sequencing of these samples has revealed the presence of thousands of species of bacteria, but it also found traces of multicellular organisms, complex life forms that seem to share more in common with species from the deep ocean than with anything found on the surface. Some of these genetic sequences are entirely unknown to science, representing a branch of life that has been diverging in the dark for an eternity. If life can thrive and evolve in such complexity beneath the ice, then the idea of an ancient civilization utilizing these subglacial waters as a resource, or even a refuge, becomes less a matter of fantasy and more a matter of unexplored probability. Moving away from the liquid depths of Vostok, we encounter another anomaly that challenges the very foundation of how we believe the Earth moves and changes. This is the Wilkes Land anomaly, a massive gravitational distortion located in the heart of East Antarctica. It is a feature so large that it can be seen from space through the lens of gravity-sensing satellites. Deep within the crust, something incredibly dense and incredibly large is pulling on the fabric of the planet. It is an object nearly 500 kilometers wide, buried beneath the ice and the rock. To put that in perspective, it is a mass that could swallow several modern metropolises whole. The sheer scale of it defies the imagination, and yet, there it sits, a silent, heavy secret at the bottom of the world. The paradox of the Wilkes Land anomaly is its shape and its location. If it is a natural geological formation, it is unlike any other on the continent. Its density is so high that it suggests a concentration of heavy metals or a collapsed structure of immense proportions. Some researchers have pointed to the crustal displacement theory as a potential explanation for how such a feature could end up in the center of a frozen wasteland. This theory, famously championed by Professor Charles Hapgood and even supported in its early stages by Albert Einstein, suggests that the Earth's outer crust can, under certain conditions, shift as a single unit over the inner mantle. This would mean that a landmass that is today at the pole could have once been at the equator, and vice versa. If Antarctica was once thousands of miles to the north, the Wilkes Land anomaly might not be a geological fluke, but the remains of a primary hub of an ancient world, a place of such importance and such massive construction that its weight left a permanent bruise on the Earth's gravity. Skepticism regarding the Wilkes Land anomaly usually points toward the stars. Most mainstream scientists believe that the gravity distortion is the result of a massive asteroid impact that occurred hundreds of millions of years ago. They argue that a meteorite strike of sufficient size would punch through the crust, causing the denser mantle material to well up and create a mass concentration that would account for the gravitational pull we see today. This explanation fits within the established timeline of the Earth's history and doesn't require the invention of a lost civilization. To the skeptic, the anomaly is a scar from a cosmic collision, a relic of a time when the Earth was a shooting gallery for the debris of the solar system. However, the rebuttal to the impact theory is found in the lack of a traditional crater. Every other massive impact site on Earth is accompanied by a clear, circular basin and a specific type of shocked quartz that can only be created by the extreme pressure of an asteroid strike. In Wilkes Land, the evidence is muddy. The gravitational shape is not perfectly circular, and the seismic data does not show the typical rebound structure of a crater floor. Instead, it shows a dense, structured mass that seems to have its own internal architecture. Furthermore, the crustal displacement theory provides a much more elegant explanation for the maps we discussed earlier. If the crust shifted suddenly, it would explain how a civilization could have mapped a green Antarctica and then been instantly erased as the continent slid into the polar circle. It would have been a catastrophe beyond reckoning. A world of forests and cities turned into a world of ice in the span of a few generations. The Wilkes Land anomaly may not be the site of a crash, but the site of a foundation, a core of a civilization that was literally moved to the end of the Earth. As we contemplate the possibility of this sudden shift, we must look at the physical evidence left behind in the biology of the continent. In the high valleys of the Antarctic interior, where the wind screams at speeds that can strip the skin from bone, explorers have found something that shouldn't be there: flash-frozen remains. Not of penguins or seals, but of a world that belonged to the sun. Deep in the permafrost, researchers have uncovered the perfectly preserved leaves of deciduous trees, the pollen of tropical flowers, and the bones of animals that required a temperate climate to survive. The state of preservation is what is most haunting. These are not fossils turned to stone over millions of years. These are biological remains that look as though they were caught in a sudden, catastrophic cold snap. This is the botanical paradox of the frozen South. To find a tropical forest in Antarctica, we are told we must look back 40 or 50 million years. But the organic material found in some of these sites is much younger, dating to a period that overlaps with the rise of the first human ancestors. How could a forest exist in a place that has been a frozen desert for an eternity? The speed of the erasure is the key. If the continent moved slowly, the forests would have withered and decayed over millennia, leaving only stone fossils behind. but the presence of fresh organic material suggests a displacement that happened with terrifying speed. It suggests a world that was functioning, breathing, and growing until the very moment the ice arrived to claim it. The skeptical view is that these remains are relict materials, carried by winds or currents and deposited in the valleys, or that they represent small refugia, where ancient life managed to cling on long after the rest of the continent had frozen. They argue that carbon dating in the extreme cold can be unreliable and that the geological timeline of Antarctica's glaciation is a well-established fact. To them, the idea of a green Antarctica existing within the time frame of human history is a romantic myth that ignores the slow, grinding reality of plate tectonics. They see the frozen leaves as a curiosity of the distant past, not a clue to a lost human chapter. Yet, the rebuttal lies in the sheer volume of the material. We are not talking about a few stray leaves, but entire layers of organic soil buried just beneath the surface. In 1986, members of a scientific expedition found a fossilized forest in the Transantarctic Mountains that was so well preserved that the wood could still be burned. This suggests a process of burial and freezing that was both rapid and absolute. If we combine this biological evidence with the maps that show the rivers and mountains of a deglaciated Antarctica, the picture begins to coalesce. We are looking at a continent that was habitable far more recently than we have been led to believe. And if it was habitable, it was almost certainly inhabited. In the vast stretches of human history, we have always moved toward the resources, toward the water, and toward the sun. A temperate Antarctica would have been the jewel of the ancient world, a massive, fertile landmass at the center of the world's oceans. Imagine, for a moment, the landscape of that forgotten Earth. Instead of a white void, imagine a continent of deep, dramatic fjords lined with towering evergreens. Imagine vast, inland plains where rivers as large as the Amazon flowed from the mountains to the sea. The air would have been crisp and clean, the soil rich with the minerals of a volcanic land. This would not have been a marginal existence. It would have been a cradle of abundance. Any civilization that arose here would have had access to limitless timber, stone, and geothermal energy. They would have been a maritime people by necessity, their lives dictated by the rhythms of the southern oceans. Their cities would have been built into the very slopes of the mountains we now see as pyramids, their architecture designed to harmonize with a landscape of overwhelming scale. But the Earth is a jealous guardian of its secrets. The same volcanic activity that gave this civilization life may have also been the catalyst for its destruction. If the crustal displacement theory is correct, a massive tectonic upheaval could have sent the continent sliding southward, away from the life-giving sun. The transition would not have been a slow cooling, but a violent descent into darkness. The rivers would have choked with ice, the forests would have been crushed by the weight of falling snow, and the great cities would have been buried under a blanket of white that would never melt. Within a few centuries, the work of thousands of years would have been silenced. The survivors, if there were any, would have been scattered to the far corners of the globe, carrying with them nothing but the memories of a lost paradise and the maps of a world that no longer existed. This theory provides a unifying explanation for the many cultural myths of a golden age or a lost homeland that appear in almost every ancient tradition. From the Atlantis of Plato to the Hyperborea of the Greeks and the Shambhala of the East, there is a persistent memory of a high civilization that vanished in a great catastrophe. We have always looked for these places in the Mediterranean or the Atlantic, but perhaps we have been looking in the wrong direction. Perhaps the lost city is not a city at all, but an entire continent, hidden in plain sight at the bottom of the world. The anomalous engineering we see in the pyramids, the magnetic pulse of Lake Vostok, and the heavy gravity of Wilkes Land are not just geological curiosities. They are the skeletal remains of a world that was erased before our history even began. As we stand in the modern era with our satellites and our deep core drills, we are finally beginning to peel back the veil. But the more we learn, the more we realize how little we know. The ice of Antarctica is not just a physical barrier. It is a psychological one. It represents the limits of our understanding and the fragility of our own place in time. We think of our civilization as permanent, as the pinnacle of human achievement. But the forgotten Earth tells a different story. It tells us that we are just one of many, a temporary inhabitant of a planet that has seen empires rise and fall in the blink of a geological eye. The white silence of the South is a warning. It is a reminder that the Earth can take back what it gives, and that the history we think we know is only the surface of a much deeper, much colder mystery. The wind across the high plateau of the Antarctic interior does not just blow. It carves. It moves across the surface of the ice like a sculptor's tool, creating ridges and furrows known as sastrugi, frozen waves of snow that can stand as tall as a man. These formations are hard as concrete, sharp enough to tear the underside of a sled or the boot of an unwary explorer. To walk among them is to wander through a gallery of abstract, white geometry, a place where the light plays tricks on the eyes and the horizon disappears into a milky haze. This is the whiteout, a phenomenon where the sky and the ground become one, and the human sense of balance is stripped away. In this void, the only thing that remains is the sound of the wind, a low, rhythmic thrumming that sounds almost like a heartbeat or the distant mechanical drone of a city that has been buried for 1,000,000 years. It is in this sensory vacuum that the mind begins to see what the ice is trying to hide. Beneath these frozen waves, the continent is a jagged landscape of mountains and valleys that have not felt the touch of the atmosphere in epochs. But the ice is not a perfect seal. It is a shifting, grinding mass that occasionally spits out the fragments of what it has consumed. In the areas known as blue ice fields, the wind strips away the upper layers of snow, exposing ancient ice that has been pushed up from the depths. Here, scientists have found more than just meteorites from space. They have found the moraine, the rocky debris carried by glaciers, that contains fragments of worked stone. These are not just shards of granite or basalt. They are pieces of obsidian and quartz that bear the distinct marks of percussion flaking and precision grinding. To the untrained eye, they are just rocks. But to those who look closer, they are the discarded tools of a hand that knew the principles of geometry and the physics of fracture. This brings us to a new thread of the paradox: the presence of anomalous lithics in the Antarctic moraine. The fact is that these stone fragments, found thousands of miles from any known human settlement, show signs of heat treatment and edge wear that are characteristic of advanced stone tool production. The paradox lies in the location. These tools are found in geological layers that correspond to a time when Antarctica was already beginning its descent into the deep freeze. If these were made by human ancestors, they were doing so in a landscape that was increasingly hostile, utilizing materials that were not native to the immediate area. It suggests a trade network or a nomadic survival strategy that spans the entire southern hemisphere, long before the rise of the first civilizations in the north. Skepticism, as always, looks to the natural world for an answer. Geologists argue that percussion flaking can occur naturally when rocks are ground together under the immense pressure of a moving glacier. They suggest that the heat treatment marks are actually the result of volcanic activity, where molten lava came into contact with sedimentary rock. To the skeptic, these are geofacts, objects that look man-made but are the result of purely mechanical and thermal processes within the Earth. They point out that the human eye is a pattern-seeking engine, and that in the desperate loneliness of the Antarctic wilderness, it is easy to see a spearhead in a splinter of volcanic glass. But the rebuttal to the geofact theory is found in the statistical distribution of these objects. Natural glacial grinding produces random, chaotic fractures. It does not produce bulbs of percussion or bifacial thinning, specific techniques used by ancient craftsmen to create symmetrical, functional edges. Furthermore, When these stone fragments are analyzed under high-power microscopes, they reveal traces of organic residue, fats, resins, and even microscopic fibers that are not consistent with the surrounding ice. These are the signatures of use. They tell a story of tools that were used to scrape hides, to cut wood, and to process the biological resources of a green Antarctica. If nature made these, she did so with a level of intentionality that mimics the human mind to a degree that is statistically impossible. We are looking at the refuse of a civilization that was living on the edge of the world, fighting against the encroaching ice with a technology that was perfectly adapted to its environment. Beyond the tools of stone, we find a much more unsettling clue in the very blood of the continent. On the edge of the Taylor Glacier, there is a feature known as the Blood Falls. It is a vivid, crimson waterfall that pours from a crack in the white ice, staining the snowy landscape like an open wound. For decades, it was one of the most striking mysteries of the Antarctic, a visual anomaly that seemed to scream for an explanation. The fact is that the water is a hypersaline brine, trapped in a subglacial reservoir for over 2 million years. It is rich in iron, which oxidizes when it hits the air, creating the deep red color. But the paradox is not the color. It is the chemistry of the water itself. When researchers finally managed to sample the brine of the Blood Falls, they found that it was teeming with life. But it was not just any life. It was a community of microbes that had been sealed away from the rest of the world, surviving without light or oxygen by breathing iron and sulfur. This is a form of metabolism that is almost alien to our surface world. The paradox deepens when we look at the structural nature of the reservoir. The brine is held in a pocket that is perfectly sealed, yet it maintains a constant temperature and chemical balance that is far more stable than the surrounding environment. It functions like a closed-loop life support system. Some have suggested that these pockets of life are not natural accidents, but are the remnants of ancient biological engineering, deliberate vaults created by a civilization that knew the ice was coming and sought to preserve the biological building blocks of their world. The skeptical response is that nature is the ultimate engineer. Given 2 million years, evolution can find a way to survive in even the most extreme conditions. The Blood Falls, they argue, is simply a natural time capsule, a remnant of an ancient fjord that was cut off by the advancing glacier. The microbes didn't need engineering to survive. They just needed time and the slow, steady chemistry of the Earth's crust. To suggest that this is a biological vault is to indulge in science fiction, ignoring the well-documented ability of extremophiles to thrive in the dark, salty depths of our planet. The rebuttal, however, points to the unnatural purity of the microbial community. In most natural environments, you find a messy, diverse mix of species competing for resources. But the Blood Falls Reservoir contains a highly specialized, almost curated collection of organisms that perform specific chemical tasks in a way that resembles an industrial process. Furthermore, the isotopic signature of the sulfur in the water suggests it has been manipulated in a way that is difficult to explain through purely abiotic means. If we look at the Blood Falls not as a wound, but as a leak in a buried laboratory, the pieces begin to fit. It is a glimpse into a level of biotechnology that our own civilization is only just beginning to grasp, a way of sustaining life through the manipulation of the very elements of the Earth independent of the sun. As we travel further across the ice, we come to the most haunting of all Antarctic anomalies, the ghost peaks of the Gamburtsev subglacial mountains. This is a mountain range the size of the Alps, yet it is completely invisible from the surface. It is buried under miles of ice in the very center of the continent. When scientists mapped these mountains using ice-penetrating radar, they found something that shouldn't exist. The mountains are sharp. They have jagged peaks and deep, V-shaped valleys. In the world of geology, sharpness is a sign of youth. Mountains that have been under an ice sheet for millions of years should be worn down, rounded, and smoothed by the incredible weight and movement of the glaciers. The paradox of the Gamburtsev Mountains is that they look as though the ice just arrived yesterday. This creates a massive rift in the established timeline. If the ice sheet has been there for 34 million years, these mountains should be nothing but a flat plain of rubble. The fact that they remain sharp suggests that either the ice is much younger than we think, or that the mountains were somehow protected from the erosion of the glaciers. This leads us back to the idea of anomalous engineering. If a civilization possessed the means to generate a thermal shield or to reinforce the structure of the mountains themselves, they could have preserved their highland strongholds even as the rest of the continent was buried. The radar maps show structures within the valleys, depressions, and alignments that do not match the patterns of natural erosion. They look like the foundations of cities, the grid lines of a society that built its capital in the highest, most defensible reaches of the continent. Skepticism offers the tectonic rejuvenation theory. It suggests that the mountains were pushed up from below at the same time the ice was forming, or that the ice at the center of the continent is cold-based, meaning it is frozen to the rock and doesn't move, therefore causing no erosion. To the skeptic, the sharpness of the Gamburtsev peaks is a geological curiosity that can be explained through the specific mechanics of ice-rock interaction. They argue that we don't need a civilization to explain why a mountain is pointy. We just need to understand the physics of the polar plateau. Yet, the rebuttal lies in the thermal paradox. Even cold-based ice exerts immense pressure, and over 30 million years, the geothermal heat from the Earth's core should have softened the peaks. Furthermore, seismic soundings have detected hollows within the mountain roots, vast, cavernous spaces that are not consistent with the solid granite of a mountain range. These spaces are located exactly where the city foundations are seen on the radar. If these are natural caverns, they are of a size and symmetry that is unprecedented. But if they are engineered spaces, subterranean habitats designed to survive a planetary freeze, then the sharpness of the peaks is not a mystery. It is a choice. The mountains were not eroded because they were not just rocks. They were the outer shells of a civilization that had moved inward into the warmth of the earth as the world above turned to white. This transition from a surface civilization to a subterranean one is the missing link in the story of the forgotten earth. It explains why we find so few ruins on the surface. Everything that could be ground into dust by the ice was destroyed. But the real legacy of Antarctica is not on the mountain tops. It is within them. If we were to drill into those hollows in the Gamburtsev range, we might find the archives of a world that existed before the first pharaoh was born. We might find the source of the maps, the origins of the myths, and the biological blueprints that were leaked at the blood falls. We are looking for a ghost, but we are looking in the graveyard. The actual residents moved into the tomb long ago. To imagine this civilization is to imagine a society that had a completely different relationship with the planet. They would not have been consumers of the surface, but stewards of the deep. Their technology would have been based on gravity, magnetism, and geothermal energy, the forces that are most abundant in the heart of a continent. Their pyramids were not just monuments, but antennas or power stations designed to tap into the Earth's natural electrical field. This would explain the magnetic anomaly at Lake Vostok and the gravitational weight of Wilkes Land. These are not just masses of metal. They are the power cores of a global network that once hummed with energy. This network was not limited to Antarctica. If this was a primary civilization, they would have had outposts and colonies across the globe. This is where the cultural memory of the gods comes from. In the myths of the Sumerians, the Anunnaki came from a place called the Abzu, the deep water. In the myths of the Egyptians, the first Zep-Tepi, or first time, began with gods who emerged from a primordial mound. In the Andes, the god Viracocha rose from the waters of Lake Titicaca to bring civilization to a world in darkness. If we look at these stories not as fantasies, but as the garbled memories of survivors, the gods were simply the refugees of the Antarctic collapse. They arrived in the north with their knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and agriculture, appearing to the primitive hunter-gatherers of the time as beings of immense power. The skepticism toward this global diaspora theory is that there is no genetic or archaeological evidence of a master race arriving in the north. Mainstream archaeology shows a slow, localized development of culture in places like Mesopotamia and Peru. They argue that the similarities in myths are the result of the universal human psyche, that all humans have the same fears and aspirations, and so they create similar stories. To the skeptic, the idea of an Antarctic origin for civilization is a God of the gaps argument, filling in the unknowns of history with a grand, unsupported narrative. But the rebuttal is found in the technological jumps. In almost every ancient civilization, there is a moment where architecture and mathematics suddenly leap forward without a clear developmental path. The transition from mud bricks to the precision-cut, multi-ton megaliths of the Old Kingdom in Egypt happened in the span of just a few generations. The mathematical precision of the calendars of the Maya and the astronomical alignments of Stonehenge suggest a level of knowledge that should have taken thousands of years of observation to acquire. If this knowledge was inherited from a more advanced, older source, the suddenness makes sense. We don't see the development because the development didn't happen in Egypt or Sumer. It happened in the south, in the green forests of a continent that is now a white void. The genetic evidence may also be there, hidden in the junk DNA that scientists are only now beginning to decode. The remnants of a biological legacy that has been diluted over 10,000 years but never truly erased. The tragedy of the forgotten Earth is not that it disappeared, but that it was so thoroughly silenced. The ice did more than just bury the buildings. It buried the memory. It turned a thriving, global center into a place of monsters and voids. But the Earth has a way of keeping time that is different from our own. To the planet, the 10,000 years since the last ice age is just a breath. The ice is already beginning to thin. As the world warms, the shroud is being pulled back. We are seeing the mountains sharpen, the lakes breathe, and the anomalies pulse with a renewed intensity. We are not just discovering the past, we are witnessing its return. The modern relevance of this search is found in our own fragility. We live in a world that is increasingly dependent on complex systems, power grids, satellite networks, global trade. We think of these things as permanent, but the history of Antarctica shows us how quickly permanence can be erased. A shift in the Earth's crust, a change in the sun's output, or a collapse of the oceanic currents could turn our own green world into a white one in a matter of centuries. We are not the masters of the Earth. We are its guests. The first civilization was more advanced than we are in many ways. They lived in harmony with the planet's deepest forces, and yet they were still overcome by the power of deep time. Their story is a mirror. If we look into the ice, we are not just looking for them. We are looking for our own future. To stand upon the Ross ice shelf is to stand upon the lid of a gargantuan, frozen drum. It is a slab of ice the size of France, floating on the edge of the Southern Ocean, thick enough to ground a mountain and wide enough to swallow the horizon. For decades, researchers who braved the solitude of this place reported a strange sensation. Not a sound, but a vibration that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the marrow of the bone. It was only recently, with the deployment of ultrasensitive seismic sensors, that the truth was revealed. The ice is singing. A constant, low-frequency hum vibrates through the shelf, a melodic drone that never stops. This is the song of the Ross, a sound produced by the wind as it brushes across the surface of the snow dunes. But it is far more complex than a simple whistle. It is a stable, multi-layered frequency that shifts with the temperature and the movement of the tides, creating a haunting, subterranean symphony that echoes through the dark waters below. The paradox of this acoustic phenomenon lies in its mathematical precision. While wind-blown vibrations are typically chaotic and discordant, the hum of the Ross ice shelf possesses a rhythmic stability that mirrors the fundamental harmonics of the Earth itself. It is a sound that interacts with the ionosphere, the electrified upper layer of our atmosphere, creating a feedback loop between the frozen ground and the edge of space. The paradox is that this singing is most intense directly above the areas where the subglacial topography shows the most anomalous geometric features. It is as if the ice is acting as a massive acoustic lens, focusing the internal vibrations of the planet into a coherent signal. If there were once cities here, if there were once great halls carved into the bedrock, they would have been designed to resonate with this very frequency. The architecture of the first civilization would not have been merely a shelter from the wind, but an instrument designed to capture and amplify the Earth's own voice. Skepticism, anchored in the rigorous observations of modern geophysics, provides a more material explanation. The singing ice is, to the skeptic, a purely mechanical byproduct of fluid dynamics. They argue that the wind, moving over the specific texture of the sastrugi snow ridges, creates what is known as an aeolian vibration, the same principle that causes a telephone wire to hum in a storm. The interaction with the ionosphere is seen as a coincidental alignment of electromagnetic frequencies, a natural phenomenon of the polar regions where the Earth's magnetic field lines converge. To the scientist, there is no music in the ice, only the grinding, shifting, and blowing of matter under the influence of gravity and pressure. They see the song of the Ross as a beautiful but ultimately mindless accident of nature, devoid of intent or ancient design. Yet, the rebuttal to this mechanical view is found in the way the sound affects the human consciousness and the historical record of sacred frequencies. Throughout the ancient world, from the resonant chambers of the Great Pyramid to the chanting rituals of the Himalayan monks, there has been a persistent obsession with specific sound frequencies, most notably the 432 Hz Pythagorean tuning. When the song of the Ross is pitch-shifted into the audible range, it reveals a harmonic structure that aligns perfectly with these ancient mathematical constants. Why would a random wind-blown vibration in the most isolated place on Earth mirror the exact frequencies used by disparate cultures thousands of miles away to induce states of deep trance and healing? The rebuttal suggests that the first civilization did not just live in Antarctica. They understood the planet as a resonant body. They built their world in the one place where the Earth's vibration is most pure, using the continent as a literal master clock for a global network of sound and energy. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, a process that in the Antarctic winter takes weeks of lingering twilight, the sky above the continent ignites with the aurora australis. These are not merely lights. They are the visual manifestation of the Earth's dialogue with the sun. The greens, purples, and crimsons dance in curtains that span the entire sky, following the invisible lines of the magnetic field. In this ethereal glow, the landscape takes on a different texture. The ice appears translucent, like a skin stretched over a sleeping giant. We must now turn our attention to the final piece of this investigation, the concept of the celestial gateway. In the high plateaus of the interior, where the air is the clearest and driest on the planet, there are areas where the magnetic field is not just strong, but uniquely transparent. It is here that the interaction between the Earth's core and the solar wind is at its most intimate. The paradox of these magnetic portals is that they align with the locations of the anomalous gravity readings and the subterranean hollows of the Gamburtsev Mountains. If we look at the maps of the ancient world, those charts that showed a green Antarctica, we see that they often placed a central mountain or a pole star temple at the very center of the southern continent. The paradox is one of function. Why would an ancient people, thousands of years before the invention of the telescope or the satellite, be so obsessed with the exact center of the frozen south? It suggests that they were not just observers of the stars, but participants in a cosmic exchange. They recognized that Antarctica was the anchor of the planet, the place where the celestial and the terrestrial meet. Their civilization was not built for conquest or expansion, but for alignment, a way of anchoring human consciousness to the rhythms of the galaxy. Skepticism looks at this and sees the apex of projection. To the modern historian, the idea of an ancient celestial gateway is a classic example of mythic inflation, taking a natural geological feature like the South Pole and turning it into a metaphysical center. They argue that the reason ancient maps focused on the poles was because the pole is a mathematical necessity for navigation, not because there was anything actually there. The transparency of the magnetic field is simply a result of the Earth's dipole nature, a physical fact of any rotating planet with a molten core. To the skeptic, the aurora is a light show, the magnetism is a compass, and the temple is a dream. There is no evidence of high-technology observatories in the ice, only the cold, hard reality of a spinning rock in a dark universe. The rebuttal, however, lies in the precognitive nature of ancient astronomy. How did the Dogon people of Africa know about the dark companion of the star Sirius, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye, long before the invention of powerful telescopes? How did the Maya calculate the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes 26,000 years, with a precision that matches our best modern instruments? If the first civilization was centered in the Antarctic, they would have had the perfect platform for this knowledge. The long polar nights, the thin atmosphere, and the stability of the Antarctic plateau would have allowed them to map the heavens with a clarity impossible anywhere else on Earth. They didn't need high technology in the way we understand it. They used the planet itself as their instrument. The alignment of the pyramids and the hollows with the cardinal points and the stars is not a coincidence. It is the fossilized remnant of a science that saw no distinction between the earth beneath their feet and the stars above their heads. We have reached the moment where all these threads, the maps of a green world, the geometry of the mountains, the magnetic pulse of the lakes, the flash-frozen forests, and the singing ice, must be woven into a single unifying theory. This is the citadel of the first dawn. The theory is that Antarctica was not just a colony or a fragment of a lost world, but the primary engine of a global civilization that existed during a time of geological stability that we can barely imagine. This civilization was not based on the consumption of resources, but on the management of planetary energy. They were a Type 1 civilization in the making, capable of harnessing the geothermal heat of the Antarctic rifts, the magnetic currents of the poles, and the resonant frequencies of the crust. The collapse of this world was not a slow decline, but a sudden, violent displacement. Around 12,000 years ago, a date that matches the end of the last ice age and the mysterious Younger Dryas cooling period, the Earth's crust underwent a catastrophic shift. Whether triggered by a solar flare, a grazing comet, or a natural instability in the planet's rotation, the continent of Antarctica was physically moved. It slid from a temperate, subtropical position into the polar circle in the span of a few generations. The forests were crushed, the rivers were choked, and the great resonant cities were silenced by the encroaching ice. This was the great flood of 100 different cultures, the fall of Atlantis, the end of the Satya Yuga. It was the moment the Earth's memory was reset. The survivors of this catastrophe fled northward, carrying with them the seeds of civilization. They arrived in the Nile Valley, the Indus Valley, and the high Andes as the Shining Ones, the bringers of knowledge. They taught the primitive tribes they encountered how to build with stone, how to track the stars, and how to farm the land. But they could never rebuild the world they had lost. They were refugees in a darkening world, their technology fading into ritual, their science into myth. The pyramids of Giza and the megaliths of Baalbek were desperate attempts to recreate the resonant power of their Antarctic home, using the materials available in the north. They were echoes of a master song that was now buried under 2 miles of ice. As we look at the world today, this theory provides a profound "so what" to our modern existence. We live in a time of unprecedented climate change, but the forgotten Earth tells us that we have been here before. The melting of the Antarctic ice is not just a threat to our coastal cities. It is an unveiling. For the first time in 12,000 years, the shroud is being lifted. We are beginning to see the shapes of the valleys, the color of the stones, and the anomalies that have been hidden for an eternity. The return of Antarctica to the surface of human awareness is a mirror held up to our own civilization. We are a society that has forgotten its origins, a species with amnesia. We think of ourselves as the first to master the world, but we are merely the latest to inhabit it. The modern relevance of the Antarctic mystery is a warning about the fragility of our permanent systems. We have built a world based on the assumption that the Earth is a stable, predictable platform. We have built our cities on coastlines that used to be seafloors and our farms on lands that used to be deserts. But the ice of the South reminds us that the Earth is a living, shifting entity, can reset the clock at any moment. The anomalous engineering we find in the ice is a testament to a people who tried to live with the planet, to anchor themselves to its deepest rhythms, and even they were silenced. What hope do we have, we who have treated the Earth as a mere quarry for our appetites? The philosophical outro of this story is one of deep time and humble recognition. To look at Antarctica is to look into the eyes of eternity. It is a place that does not care about our names, our borders, or our technology. It is a place of absolute cold and absolute silence, yet it is pregnant with the memory of everything we have ever been. We are drawn to it because it is our homeland in the most primal sense, the place where the human story truly began, and perhaps the place where it is destined to be rediscovered. The mystery of the ice is not something to be solved. It is something to be experienced. It is a reminder that there are truths that cannot be captured in a laboratory or written in a textbook. There are truths that can only be felt in the vibration of the singing ice and seen in the dance of the southern lights. As the ice continues to thin and the ghost of the first civilization begins to emerge from the white void, we must ask ourselves if we are ready to hear the song they left behind. Are we ready to realize that we are not the masters of history, but its students? The forgotten Earth is not a place of the past. It is a presence that has been with us all along, waiting in the dark, waiting for the sun to return. The white veil is lifting, and beneath it, the world is beginning to breathe again. We are standing on the threshold of a new understanding, a moment where the maps of the 16th century and the satellites of the 21st century finally align. The South is no longer the end of the world. It is the beginning. In the final, lingering light of the Antarctic summer, the mountains cast shadows that stretch for 100 miles. These shadows are not just absence of light. They are pointers. They point toward a past that we are only just beginning to imagine and a future that we must face with the humility of those who know they are not the first. The cold wind that blows from the pole carries the scent of ozone and ancient stone, a scent that was familiar to the first humans who ever looked up at the stars and wondered who they were. We are those same humans, still wondering, still searching, while the ice slowly, relentlessly gives up its secrets. If you have felt the resonance of this journey, if you have heard the hum of the singing ice in the silence of your own mind, perhaps it is time to look deeper. The stories we tell are the only things that can survive the ice. We must keep telling them, keep searching for the fragments of the world that was lost, so that when the shroud finally falls, we will recognize the home we have been missing for 10,000 years. The southern pole is not a void. It is a memory, and it is time for us to remember. To fully grasp the magnitude of what lies beneath, we must allow our minds to travel back, past the edge of the ice, into a world that no longer exists. Imagine a continent that is not a white desert, but a vibrant emerald crown at the bottom of the world. This was a land of staggering topographical drama, where the mountains did not just rise. They soared, their granite peaks wreathed in the mists of 1,000 waterfalls. The air here was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the sweet, resinous musk of ancient conifer forests. These were not the stunted trees of the modern tundra, but giants, their trunks wider than the hulls of ships, their canopies forming a deep, verdant ceiling that filtered the long, golden light of the southern sun. In the valleys, the rivers did not just flow. They carved great, winding paths through the volcanic soil, their waters dark and rich with the minerals of the Earth's interior. This was the stage upon which the first civilization played out its long, forgotten history, a world of light, water, and stone that was as solid and permanent as our own. The architecture of this first world was not something imposed upon the landscape, but something grown from it. The cities of the forgotten Earth were not built of steel and glass, but of a substance that defied the simple categories of stone and metal. It was a lithic composite, a material that felt like polished obsidian to the touch but possessed the tensile strength of modern alloys. They built their structures in harmony with the natural ley lines of the continent, aligning their great halls with the magnetic currents that pulsed beneath the crust. To walk through one of these cities would be to experience a total immersion in resonance. The walls were not just barriers. They were acoustic membranes designed to capture the low-frequency hum of the Earth and translate it into a steady, clean energy that lit the interiors with a soft, bioluminescent glow. There were no wires, no burning fires, no plumes of smoke. The civilization was silent, powered by the very heartbeat of the planet, a society that had mastered the art of living within the Earth's natural metabolic cycles. In the center of the continent, where the Gamburtsev Mountains now lie buried, there stood the capital of this world, a city of spiraling towers and subterranean plazas that descended deep into the warmth of the geothermal rifts. Here, the engineering was at its most profound. They had tapped into the subterranean rivers of superheated water, using the pressure to drive massive crystalline turbines that hummed with a power we are only now beginning to theorize. The plazas were filled with gardens that grew plants from every corner of the globe, maintained by a climate-controlled atmosphere that utilized the natural insulation of the rock. The light was channeled from the surface through vast, polished shafts of quartz, bathing the underground world in a perpetual, golden twilight. It was a place of absolute stability, a sanctuary of knowledge and art that had endured for thousands of years, seemingly immune to the shifting fortunes of the outside world. But the stability of the Earth is an illusion born of our own short lifespans. Deep within the mantle, the forces that govern the movement of the crust were beginning to align in a way that would spell the end of this golden age. The theory of crustal displacement suggests that the outer shell of the planet is like the skin of an orange, capable of slipping over the fruit within. For millennia, the weight of the Antarctic ice, which was then just a small, high-altitude cap in the center of the continent, had been growing, creating a gravitational imbalance. The planet, seeking to regain its equilibrium, reached a tipping point. The stars, which had been fixed in their constellations for eons, began to move. To an observer on the surface, it would have appeared as if the heavens themselves were falling. The sun, instead of tracing its familiar path across the sky, began to drift toward the horizon, its warmth fading with every passing day. The onset of the Great Shift was not a sudden explosion, but a terrifying, grinding transition. The ground beneath the great cities began to groan with the weight of the entire continent sliding southward. In the forests, the trees shivered as the temperature plummeted, the sap within their trunks freezing and splitting the wood with the sound of 1,000 rifle shots. The rivers, once the lifeblood of the civilization, slowed and choked with slush, their dark waters turning into jagged fields of gray ice. The animals, the great wandering herds and the birds of the southern temperate zones, began a desperate, futile migration toward a north that was receding faster than they could run. The world was being physically dragged into the dark, into the realm of the eternal winter where the sun would not rise for months at a time. As the continent moved into the polar circle, the moisture in the atmosphere began to fall as a relentless, unending snow. This was not the light, powdery snow of a northern winter, but a heavy, wet blanket that froze as soon as it touched the ground. In the cities, the great quartz light shafts were the first to be extinguished, buried under feet of ice in a matter of days. The people retreated into the subterranean plazas, huddling around the geothermal vents as the world above turned into a nightmare of wind and white. They watched through their sensors as the forests they had tended for generations were crushed under the advancing glaciers. They saw the great towers of their capital buckle under the weight of the ice, their obsidian walls cracking like glass as the frozen sea moved in to claim them. It was a slow-motion apocalypse, a world being buried alive by the very atmosphere that had once given it life. The struggle for survival in those final years was a testament to the ingenuity of the first civilization. They knew they could not stop the ice, so they turned their efforts to preservation. They created the vaults, the deep, pressurized chambers we now detect as magnetic anomalies and gravitational hollows into these vaults. They poured their knowledge, their history, and the biological blueprints of their world. They used their mastery of resonance to create seals that would last for millions of years, protecting their archives from the crushing pressure of the ice sheet that was now 2 miles thick above them. They recorded their maps, their star charts, and their philosophical treatises onto sheets of indestructible metal, hoping that one day, when the Earth had completed its cycle, another civilization would find them and understand that they were not the first. But as the centuries turned into millennia, the silence of the South became absolute. The survivors who had managed to escape the continent in the early stages of the shift found themselves in a world that had also been transformed. The displacement of the Antarctic crust had caused a global ripple effect, triggering massive tsunamis and volcanic eruptions across the planet. The refugees arrived on the shores of Africa, India, and South America as broken remnants of a godlike people. Their technology lost, their resources gone. They were forced to start over in a world of mud and sticks. Their stories of the Emerald Continent and the singing cities becoming the myths and legends of the primitive tribes they encountered. The memory of the forgotten Earth was distilled into the tales of Atlantis and the Garden of Eden, a distant, golden past that felt more like a dream than a reality. Meanwhile, back at the pole, the ice was performing its final act of erasure. The glaciers, moving with the weight of millions of tons, acted as a global sandpaper, grinding the surface of the continent down to the bedrock. The great forests were turned into a fine organic silt, buried under layers of permafrost. The cities were dismantled stone by stone, their fragments carried away by the ice and dumped into the southern oceans. The pyramids were scoured and shaped by the wind, their sharp edges softened until they looked like nothing more than natural peaks. The only things that remained were the deep structures, the foundations built into the very bones of the earth and the vaults sealed by the power of resonance. The continent became a white void, a place where geography had been murdered and history had been redacted. The weight of this silence is what we feel today when we look toward the south. It is the weight of 1 billion lost lives and 1,000 forgotten generations. We are standing on the surface of a giant sarcophagus, walking over the roofs of a world that was once more vibrant and more advanced than our own. When we find a piece of worked stone in the moraine or a magnetic pulse in a subglacial lake, we are not just finding a curiosity. We are touching the hand of a ghost. We are catching a glimpse of a reality that the earth has tried its best to hide. The anomalous engineering we see in the radar maps is the skeletal remains of a dream that died in the cold, a dream of a humanity that was once in perfect alignment with the planet. To understand the so what of this story, we must look at the way we treat our own permanence. We live in an era of digital records and fragile infrastructure, believing that our history is safe because it is everywhere. But the lesson of Antarctica is that the Earth can erase everywhere in the blink of an eye. If the crust were to shift again tomorrow, our data centers would be crushed, our cities would be drowned, and our languages would be forgotten. We would become the next myth, the next lost civilization that some future species would puzzle over as they dug through the ruins of our silicon and plastic. The forgotten Earth is a mirror, reflecting our own vulnerability back at us. It tells us that the only thing that truly lasts is not what we build on the surface, but what we anchor in the deep, the knowledge we pass on, and the respect we show for the forces that govern our existence. The modern relevance of the Antarctic unveiling is that it challenges our definition of progress. We see ourselves as the pinnacle of achievement, but if a civilization lived for 20,000 years in the green forests of the South, mastering energy and resonance without destroying their environment, then who is truly more advanced? We are a civilization of fire and consumption, burning the past to power our present. They were a civilization of frequency and alignment, using the planet's own heartbeat to sustain their world. As the ice melts and their secrets are revealed, we are being offered a second chance, a chance to learn from their wisdom and to avoid their fate. The unifying theory of the Citadel of the First Dawn is not just a historical hypothesis. It is a roadmap for our own survival. As the twilight of the long polar night deepens, the aurora australis begins its slow, hypnotic dance across the sky. The curtains of green and purple light seem to be searching for something, tracing the lines of the magnetic field as if looking for the towers that once reached up to meet them. In this light, the ice doesn't look like a barrier. It looks like a veil, thin and trembling. We can almost hear it, the low, rhythmic thrumming of the singing ice, the ghost of the frequency that once powered a world. It is a sound that calls to the deepest parts of our subconscious, a memory of a time when we were not strangers to the Earth, but its partners. The message of the forgotten Earth is not one of death, but of waiting. The continent is not a tomb, it is a seed. And as the sun of a new epoch begins to warm the southern stones, that seed is finally, after 12,000 years, beginning to stir. The textures of this waking world are becoming more apparent with every passing year. We see it in the way the permafrost is softening, revealing the dark, rich soil that once nourished the great forests. We see it in the way the subglacial lakes are beginning to discharge their ancient, oxygenated waters into the sea, changing the chemistry of the oceans. The Earth is preparing for a transition. The shroud is not just melting, it is being removed. And as the landscape of the first civilization emerges into the light, we must decide how we will greet it. Will we see it as a resource to be exploited, or as a sanctuary to be honored? Will we repeat the mistakes of our recent history, or will we find the humility to listen to the song of the ice? The silence of the South is finally breaking. It is being replaced by the sound of running water, the crack of shifting glaciers, and the voices of those who are brave enough to look beneath the white. We are the first generation in 12,000 years to see the true face of the southern continent. We are the first to realize that the maps were right all along. The forgotten Earth is no longer forgotten. It is here, beneath our feet, a world of stone and shadow that is ready to tell its story. All we have to do is stay and watch and listen to the long, slow breath of the planet as it wakes from its frozen sleep. The story of humanity is much older than we thought and much more beautiful, and it is all written in the deep, cold heart of the ice. To understand the final moments of the first world, we must set aside our modern concepts of time and disaster. We must imagine the night of the shift not as a single sudden explosion, but as a slow, agonizing realization that the fundamental rules of the world had changed. It began with the atmosphere. In the great coastal cities of the Emerald Antarctica, the air had always been thick with the moisture of the southern oceans, a salt-tangled breeze that carried the warmth of the tropical currents. But on the night the crust began its long slide, the wind did something it had never done in the memory of that civilization. It went silent. For 3 days, the leaves of the giant ferns and the needles of the towering conifers did not move. The birds, usually so loud in the twilight of the southern summer, vanished. The world felt like a bell that had been struck and was waiting for the sound to fade. Then came the sky. The first civilization were master astronomers. They tracked the stars not for navigation, but for alignment. They knew the position of every celestial body with a precision that would shame a modern observatory. But on the fourth night, the stars began to drift. It was a subtle movement at first, a shivering of the constellations that suggested the very dome of the heavens was coming loose. In the obsidian observatories of the high plateaus, the priests of resonance watched in horror as the pole star, the fixed point upon which their entire world was anchored, began to slide toward the horizon. The Earth was not just tilting. The skin of the planet was slipping. The continent of Antarctica was being pushed out of the light and into the shadow of the world's end. As the continent moved southward, the temperature did not just drop. It transformed. The warmth of the geothermal rifts, which had always been the primary source of energy for the cities, began to react violently to the shifting crust. The ground beneath the plazas groaned, a low-frequency vibration that could be felt in the teeth and the marrow. The crystalline light shafts, which had channeled the sun deep into the subterranean halls, began to glow with a strange, violet ionization as the magnetic field of the planet warped and buckled. The smell of the air changed from the scent of damp earth to the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. In the streets, the people did not panic. They watched in a state of profound, collective shock as the first flakes of the Great White began to fall. This was not the snow of the mountains, but a thick, gray ash of frozen moisture that felt like lead as it touched the skin. The texture of the freezing was absolute. In the forests, the giant trees did not just die. They were petrified in place by a cold that was so sudden and so deep that it bypassed the process of decay. The sap within the wood froze into crystalline shards, expanding with such force that the trunks literally exploded, sending splinters of ancient wood flying through the air like shrapnel. In the lakes, the water did not freeze from the top down, but all at once, the molecules snapping into a solid lattice in a matter of hours. The fish, the plants, and the microscopic life were caught in a moment of perfect preservation, held in a transparent tomb that would eventually be covered by miles of crushing ice. The flash-frozen world was not a myth. It was the physical reality of a continent being dragged into a sub-zero vacuum at the speed of a tectonic shift. In the final hours before the darkness became total, the leaders of the resonant cities made their choice. They knew that the surface world was lost. They knew that the emerald canopy and the obsidian towers would be ground into dust by the glaciers that were already forming on the high peaks. They initiated the deep sealing. Using their mastery of the Earth's magnetic currents, they focused the planet's own internal energy into the great vaults beneath the Gamburtsev range. These were not just bunkers. They were lithic resonators, designed to vibrate at a frequency that would repel the encroachment of the ice and maintain a pocket of stability within the crushing weight of the glaciers. They carried their archives, the metal plates etched with the history of the stars and the biological maps of their world, into the deep hollows. They sealed the doors not with locks, but with frequency, creating a barrier that only someone who understood the song of the earth could ever hope to open. The diaspora that followed was a journey of unimaginable hardship. Thousands of small, obsidian-hulled ships set sail from the crumbling coastlines, heading north toward lands that were still in the sun. These refugees carried nothing but their knowledge and their maps. They were the shining ones who would eventually arrive in the Nile Valley, the Sumerian plains, and the high peaks of the Andes. But the world they arrived in was a primitive one, a world of hunter-gatherers who looked upon these refugees as gods from a fallen heaven. The refugees tried to teach, to build, and to preserve, but the gap between their civilization and the one they encountered was too wide. Their high-technology resonance was misunderstood as magic, their astronomical science was turned into astrology, and their history was distilled into the myths of the first time. They watched as their children's children forgot the language of the South, their legacy fading into the shadows of a rising, darker age. Back in Antarctica, the silence had become a physical weight. The glaciers, now miles thick, were moving outward from the center of the continent, carrying the ruins of the cities with them. The obsidian towers were snapped like twigs, their fragments ground into a fine, black silt that would eventually settle on the seafloor. The great light shafts were filled with ice, their quartz surfaces scoured into opacity. The only things that remained were the deep vaults, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic magnetic heartbeat that the ice could not extinguish. For 12,000 years, the continent sat in this state of suspended animation, a white sarcophagus holding the body of the first world. The Earth, in its infinite patience, allowed the ice to act as a protector, shielding the ruins from the curiosity and the greed of the civilizations that would follow. But the protection of the ice is not eternal. We are living in the era of the thinning. As the global climate shifts and the edges of the Antarctic ice sheet begin to retreat, the secrets of the forgotten Earth are being revealed with a terrifying clarity. This is not just a geological event. It is a psychological one. When we see the sharp peaks of the Gamburtsev Mountains through the radar, we are looking at the roofs of the vaults. When we detect the magnetic pulse of Lake Vostok, we are hearing the echo of the deep ceiling. The anomalies are not glitches in our instruments. They are the signals of a world that is waking up. The anomalous engineering we find in the stone tools of the moraine and the geometric alignments of the subglacial ridges are the first words of a long-dead language that we are only just beginning to learn. The modern relevance of this awakening is found in the way it reorders our place in the universe. We have lived for 10,000 years under the assumption that we are the masters of time, that our civilization is the final and most perfect expression of human intelligence. But the ghost of Antarctica tells us that we are just one of many cycles. We are the inheritors of a world that was already old when our first ancestors were painting on cave walls. The so what of the forgotten Earth is a call to humility. It is a reminder that we are not the protagonists of the Earth's story, but merely its current inhabitants. The Citadel of the first dawn was more advanced, more stable, and more in tune with the planet than we will ever be, and yet they were still erased. If we are to survive the coming shifts, we must learn to listen to the Earth as they did. The final philosophical synthesis of this story is one of resonance and return. To look into the ice of Antarctica is to look into a mirror of our own future. The mystery is not what lies beneath the ice, but what lies within us. We are the survivors of that first catastrophe, the descendants of the refugees who carried the light of the South into the dark of the North. The song of the Ross and the magnetic pulse of Vostok are calling to a part of our DNA that hasn't been active since the crust shifted. They are calling us to remember that we are a planetary species, tied to the rhythms of the core and the cycles of the stars. The forgotten Earth is not a place to be conquered. It is a memory to be integrated. It is the missing piece of our identity, the foundation upon which all our myths and religions were built. As the sun of the 21st century begins to melt the white veil, we are being offered a choice. We can treat the unveiling of Antarctica as a scientific curiosity, a treasure hunt for oil and minerals, or we can see it for what it truly is, a second chance. We are standing on the threshold of a new Zeptepi, a new first time. The mountains are sharpening, the lakes are breathing, and the vaults are waiting. The first civilization did not die. They simply moved into the deep, leaving behind the blueprints for a world that can survive the ice. If we can find the courage to listen to the vibrations of the stone and the song of the frozen water, we might find the keys to our own endurance. The Citadel of the first dawn is not a ruin. It is a promise. In the absolute silence of the polar plateau, where the air is so cold it feels like glass, the past and the future are the same thing. The forgotten Earth is no longer a story of what was, but a vision of what will be. We are moving toward a world where the ice will no longer be a shroud, but a memory. And as the first green shoots of a new southern forest eventually break through the thawing soil, they will find the obsidian shards of the old world waiting for them. The cycle will complete itself, the resonance will return, and the song of the earth will be heard once again by those who have finally learned how to listen. The white desert is blooming, not with plants, but with truth. And the truth is that we have never been alone on this planet. We have only been asleep. The continent of Antarctica stands as the ultimate witness to the Earth's power to create and to destroy. It is a place where deep time is not an abstract concept, but a physical reality that can be touched and measured. Every layer of the ice is a page in a book that we are only just beginning to read. Every anomalous reading is a whisper from a civilization that knew the planet better than we know our own reflections. As we continue to probe the depths, to drill into the subglacial seas, and to map the invisible mountains, we must do so with the reverence of a student entering a sacred library. We are not there to take. We are there to learn. We are there to find the fragments of ourselves that we lost 12,000 years ago in the Great White Dark. The final call to action is one of observation and awareness. Look to the south not as a void, but as a source. Watch the way the ice moves, the way the light dances in the aurora, and the way the anomalies pulse in the data. The forgotten Earth is speaking to us through the language of physics and the patterns of the stone. It is telling us that the world is much larger, much older, and much more mysterious than we have been led to believe. To join the journey of discovery is to acknowledge that the story is not over. The veil is lifting. The shining ones are waiting in the archives of the deep, and the first world is ready to be remembered. Stay focused on the white, for in its depths, the emerald heart of the planet is starting to beat once more. The air in the southern pole is thinning, and the light is growing longer. The shadows of the transantarctic mountains stretch across the ice like the fingers of a giant, reaching out toward a world that has forgotten its name. But the names are still there, etched into the metal plates of the Gamburtsev vaults, vibrating in the water of Lake Vostok, and singing in the hum of the Ross Shelf. We are the ones who must say them out loud. We are the ones who must carry the story of the forgotten Earth into the light of the new dawn. The ice is melting, the silence is ending, and the first civilization is finally, after an eternity of winter, coming home. To understand the true scale of the silence that has gripped the southern continent for 12 millennia, we must move past the coastlines and the mountain ranges and journey to the absolute center, the geographical South Pole. This is a place where the concept of direction collapses. Every path away from this point is north, and every wind that blows is a visitor from a world that the pole has long since forgotten. Here, the ice is not just a covering. It is a solid, translucent mass nearly 3 miles deep, pressing down on the bedrock with the weight of 1 billion atmosphere-crushing tons. It is at this precise anchor point of the spinning Earth that the most profound anomaly of all resides. It is not a shape or a sound, but a void, a localized suspension of the Earth's normal seismic behavior. For reasons that defy conventional geophysics, the ground at the very tip of the world does not vibrate with the rest of the planet. It is the eye of the geological storm, a place of perfect, unnatural stillness that suggests a foundation far deeper and more structured than mere granite. Imagine, if you will, the sensation of standing at this point, where the air is so cold it feels like a physical presence against the skin, a dry, crystalline weight that slows the breath and sharpens the senses. Beneath your boots, the ice stretches down into a darkness that hasn't seen a photon since the era of the Great Shift. But if we could descend through that white veil, past the layers of compressed snow and the grit of the ancient atmosphere, we would find ourselves not in a cave of rock, but in a cathedral of light. This is the fabled Hall of Records of the First Dawn, the central node of the resonance grid that once spanned the entire continent. The walls of this space are not rough-hewn. They are composed of a self-repairing lithic glass, a substance that pulses with a faint, rhythmic amber glow. This light does not come from a bulb or a flame, but from the friction of the Earth's crust itself, converted into visible frequency by the very geometry of the chamber. The texture of the air inside this deep vault is unlike anything on the surface. It is pressurized, ancient, and carries the faint, electric scent of a world that was powered by the sky. There is no dust here, for the resonance of the walls creates a standing wave that keeps the atmosphere in a state of perpetual purity. As you move through the corridors, your footsteps do not echo. They are absorbed by the floor, which feels slightly warm to the touch, vibrating with the low-frequency heartbeat of the planet's core. The archives are not books, but arrays of crystalline pillars, each one etched with microscopic patterns that store the collective memory of 20,000 years of civilization. These pillars are arranged in circles that mirror the constellations of the southern sky as they appeared before the shift, a celestial map carved in stone and light, waiting for someone with the eyes to see and the mind to interpret. To touch one of these pillars is to bridge the gap of deep time. The surface of the crystal is smooth, cooler than the air, yet it seems to hum with a restless intelligence. This is where they stored the blueprints of their anomalous engineering, the secrets of how to move water through the mountains without pumps, how to harvest the electricity of the aurora, and how to breed plants that could grow in the long twilight of the polar seasons. But more importantly, this is where they stored their warning. They knew that the Earth was a living, breathing entity, prone to sudden and violent shifts of its outer skin. They understood that their time in the sun was a gift, not a right. The archives are a testament to a people who did not seek to conquer the planet, but to harmonize with it, knowing all the while that the harmony would eventually break. The paradox of our modern search for this place is that we are looking for it with tools of fire and metal, while the vault itself is built on the principles of frequency and spirit. We send satellites to map the ice and drills to pierce the crust, but we are like children trying to understand a symphony by looking at the wood of the violin. The magnetic anomalies and gravity distortions that our instruments record are merely the footprints of a much larger reality. The real treasure of Antarctica is not the gold or the oil that might lie beneath the rock, but the knowledge of how to live on a planet that is constantly changing. The so what of the forgotten Earth is that we are currently repeating the mistakes of the final days of the First World. We have become arrogant in our permanence, building our civilization on the surface of a world that is designed to reset itself. The modern relevance of this realization is staggering. We live in a world that is increasingly fragile, dependent on a global web of electricity and data that could be severed by a single significant solar flare or a minor tectonic displacement. We have forgotten how to read the stars, how to feel the vibration of the earth, and how to listen to the song of the wind. We have traded the deep resonance of the first civilization for the shallow static of the modern age. But as the ice of the southern continent continues to thin, the frequency of the ancient vaults is beginning to leak out into the world. It is manifesting as ghost signals in our communication networks, as unexplained shifts in the migration patterns of birds, and as a growing sense of unease in the collective human psyche. The Earth is trying to remind us of who we were and who we must become if we are to survive the next great shift. Consider the memory of the water in the subglacial lakes. This water has been isolated for millions of years, held in a state of high-pressure purity that makes it a perfect medium for the storage of information. Some theoretical physicists have suggested that water itself has a memory, a way of recording the vibrations and frequencies it is exposed to. If this is true, then Lake Vostok and the hundreds of other hidden seas beneath the ice are not just bodies of water. They are liquid hard drives, containing the acoustic signature of everything that has ever happened on the continent. The song of the Ross and the rhythmic pulses detected by our sensors might be the water itself replaying the sounds of the great cities, the rituals of the resonance priests, and the final, haunting cries of a world being buried in white. When we drill into these lakes, we are not just taking samples. We are opening a door to a sensory experience that has been held in stasis since the dawn of man. The skepticism toward such ideas is rooted in our fear of the unknown. We find it easier to believe in asteroid impacts and random geological flukes than in the idea that we are a fallen people, the survivors of a much greater and more enlightened age. We cling to the linear narrative of progress because it makes us feel safe, as if every year we are getting smarter and more powerful. But the ghost of the first civilization challenges this comfort. It tells us that we are in a period of decline, a long, dark winter of the soul that began 12,000 years ago. The anomalous engineering we find in the ice is not a mystery to be solved. It is a standard to be met. It is a reminder that there was once a time when humans were not at war with the planet, but were its guardians, using their intelligence to amplify the Earth's natural beauty rather than to strip it bare. The philosophical outro of this journey brings us back to the individual. What does it mean for us in the year 2025 to know that a lost world is waking up beneath the ice? It means that we are part of a story that is far larger than our own lives. It means that the forgotten Earth is not a place in the past, but a state of being that is still accessible to us. We can find our own resonance by slowing down, by listening to the quiet parts of the world, and by recognizing our connection to the deep time of the planet. The ice is melting, yes, and that brings with it great danger. But it also brings with it the return of the light. The citadel of the first dawn is being unveiled not to destroy us, but to guide us through the transition that is already underway. The final integration of this story is a vision of the future. Imagine a day, perhaps not as far off as we think, when the last of the great ice sheets has retreated from the Gamburtsev peaks. The world will see a landscape that is both alien and familiar. They will see the obsidian towers, scoured by the glaciers but still standing, their geometry reflecting the light of a sun that has finally returned to the south. They will see the great light shafts, now clear of ice, reaching deep into the earth like the eyes of a waking giant. And they will hear the sound, not the hum of the singing ice, but the clear, resonant tone of a civilization that has finally found its voice again. This is the promise of the forgotten Earth. It is the promise that nothing is ever truly lost, that memory is stronger than the ice, and that the story of humanity is a cycle of return. As we conclude this deep dive into the white silence of the South, let the weight of the ice settle in your mind. Feel the pressure of the deep time, the cold of the ancient air, and the warmth of the subterranean fires. We are the witnesses to an awakening. We are the bridge between the world that was and the world that is to be. The mystery of Antarctica is the mystery of ourselves, hidden in the one place where we were forced to forget it. But the forgetting is over. The first civilization is no longer a ghost. It is a presence, a heartbeat, a frequency that is rising with every inch of melting ice. Look to the south. Stay focused on the horizon where the aurora dances and listen. The Earth is telling us its oldest story, and for the first time in 12,000 years, we are finally ready to hear it. The textures of the world to come will be defined by how we respond to this unveiling. Will we meet the return of the first world with the same greed and violence that has characterized our recent history, or will we find the resonance necessary to join them in their stewardship of the planet? The archives of the light are open, the memory of the water is flowing, and the celestial gateway is clear. We are standing on the threshold of the most significant discovery in the history of our species, the discovery of who we were before the ice. The forgotten Earth is forgotten no more. It is here, it is now, and it is breathing. Let the resonance guide you, let the silence teach you, and let the white veil remind you that the most beautiful things in the universe are often the ones that have been hidden the longest. The dawn is coming to the southern pole, and with it, the return of the first light. In these final moments of reflection, consider the sheer endurance of the human spirit. For 12,000 years, through the rise and fall of countless empires, through the Dark Ages and the Industrial Revolutions, the memory of the green Antarctica has survived in our blood. It has whispered to us in our dreams, it has guided our myths, and it has pulled us toward the ends of the earth. We have been searching for our home for an eternity, and we have finally found it in the place where we least expected it. The Citadel is not a place of stone and metal. It is a place of memory and alignment. It is the anchor of our species, the point where we are connected to the stars and the core. The ice was never a wall. It was a cocoon, and now the cocoon is breaking. The wind at the South Pole is picking up now, carrying the scent of the coming change. It is a wind that has traveled over 3 miles of vertical ice, picking up the vibrations of the vaults below. It is a wind that speaks of the great reset, of the first time, and of the eternal return. As you listen to its low, rhythmic drone, let it wash away the static of the modern world. Let it pull you into the deep flow of the forgotten earth. We are not lost. We are not alone. We are simply coming back to where we started, at the bottom of the world, in the heart of the ice, in the light of the first dawn. The story is complete, the cycle is closed, and the silence of the South is finally, beautifully broken.